He was used to waking up early, but that morning something felt off. Julian Carter, 34, sat alone in his Manhattan hotel room, staring at the untouched breakfast tray. His phone was silent, not even a good morning text from Nate. That was unusual. They had always promised to check in, especially when one of them traveled. This time was no different. Julian had only been gone for 2 days, on a short business trip to New York. 3 nights. That was all. Just enough time to present a pitch, meet a client, and get back home. Back to Nate. Nathaniel Whitmore Nate was 36, a freelance architect with soft eyes and a voice that could calm any storm. He and Julian had been together for more than 7 years, married for 5. They shared a house in suburban Chicago, a dog named Alto, and a life that on the surface looked perfect. But things had shifted lately. Julian's work as a creative director meant longer hours, endless campaigns, and late-night flights. Nate had been patient, mostly, but even patience had limits. Julian had noticed the signs. The longer silences, the shorter texts. The way "I miss you" had quietly been replaced by "remember to eat." Still, he thought this trip might reset something. He had promised Nate a weekend getaway once he got back, somewhere quiet, just the two of them. He hadn't expected the distance to grow sharper overnight. His last message from Nate had simply read, "Helping mom with dinner. Bad signal here." That was yesterday afternoon. Since then, nothing. Julian knew Estelle was in town. Nate's mother, Estelle Whitmore, 61, was the kind of woman who didn't knock before entering a room, metaphorically or otherwise. Powerful, wealthy, ruthlessly traditional. She believed in roles clear, structured, and old-fashioned. To her, a husband who traveled constantly for work wasn't really a husband. A marriage, in her words, was a partnership rooted in presence. She never liked Julian's schedule, or his ambition, or the fact that her son was building a life that didn't revolve around her concept of family. Julian tried not to let it bother him. Estelle had always been a storm that passed, but this time the wind felt different. He opened his phone again. No new messages. Out of habit, he checked his email. Nothing from the agency, nothing from Nate, just one unread message. It was from Mrs. Langan, their neighbor across the fence. Julian tapped it open, expecting something trivial. Instead, the message read, "Hi, Julian. Hope your trip is going well. Just curious, what's the occasion at your place? They've been setting up a big white tent in your backyard since this morning. Catering trucks just arrived. Look like a wedding setup. Hope it's nothing urgent." His breath caught in his throat. A tent at their home. Julian stood up, slowly, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. He walked to the window, stared out at the Manhattan skyline, but all he could see was his backyard in Chicago. Nate, Estelle, a white tent. He refreshed his messages again. Still nothing. Every instinct in his body screamed that something was wrong. Not just strange, but wrong. He opened his travel app, booked the earliest flight back home, and began packing his things without a word. In his mind, he tried to think of logical explanations. A surprise party? A client event? But none of them made sense. Not without telling him. Not with Estelle in charge. And definitely not while he was away. His hands trembled as he zipped up his suitcase. Julian Carter had always trusted 2 things: his intuition and Nate. That day, one of them was about to break, and the other would lead him to the most shocking moment of his life. If you've ever had to come home to something you never saw coming, or question the silence from someone you trusted, make sure to follow Heart Story for more true-to-the-heart storytelling. Part 2 is coming soon. The taxi pulled into the quiet suburban street just after dusk. Julian Carter stepped out, suitcase in hand, and immediately noticed something surreal: soft music drifting through the air, distant laughter, and the unmistakable glow of string lights flickering behind his house. It wasn't a birthday party. It wasn't a family gathering. It felt choreographed. He rounded the corner of the driveway, then he froze. There, spread across the backyard he had helped design with Nate, was a fully decorated wedding reception. Rows of white chairs, flower arches, a live string quartet, guests in pastel dresses and tailored suits holding flutes of champagne, lanterns glowing under the fading light, a white canopy stretched over the lawn like a crown. And beneath it, Nate, his husband, stood near the center of it all, dressed in a fitted tuxedo, glass in hand. He looked relaxed, even happy, but not alone. Next to him stood a man Julian didn't recognize at first, slightly taller. Sandy hair swept back, a strong jawline softened by familiarity. It clicked slowly. Beau Landon, Nate's ex-boyfriend from college, the one Julian had only ever seen in an old yearbook photo, barely mentioned in years. Julian didn't step forward. He didn't call out. He simply watched. And then Estelle appeared, wearing a pale blue gown and pearls. She glided toward him from the side yard with the grace of someone who believed every moment should be hers. Her smile was warm, but not kind. "Julian," she said, almost playfully, "you're early, but perhaps that's for the best. Now you can witness what it means to show up for someone with presence." Her words stung more than he expected. Julian tried to keep his voice steady. "What's going on?" Estelle tilted her head. "Nate deserves a life partner who isn't always somewhere else. Someone who doesn't need to be reminded what a home is." Then she stepped inside, revealing a small table near the garden. On it, a slim folder. Julian approached slowly. It was a set of divorce papers, signed by Nate on one side, his own signature line left blank. He turned around. Nate had seen him now. Their eyes locked across the garden. For a moment or so, everything around them faded: the music, the chatter, the curated perfection of the scene. Julian walked toward him. Nate didn't move. When they were finally face to face, Julian's voice was barely above a whisper, "And this is how you end it." Nate opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked to Beau, then back at Julian. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he said. "I told Beau it was just dinner, a small reunion. I didn't plan this." Julian stared at him. "You signed the papers." I thought we were already unraveling," Nate murmured. "And Mom said you'd agreed to everything." Beau stepped forward, visibly pale. "You told me you two had separated, that Julian was supportive of this ceremony." Nate turned sharply. "I never said that. I don't even remember. Half of what happened today feels blurred." Julian didn't respond. He walked away, past the clinking glasses and murmurs, past the confused guests, past Estelle, who stood with her arms crossed like a monarch watching a kingdom realign. But as he crossed the edge of the lawn, his mind was already racing. The Nate he knew, the man who cried during adoption ads, who packed extra scarves in winter, just in case, who once spent days designing a handmade card for their anniversary, that man wouldn't orchestrate betrayal this elaborate, which meant someone else had. Julian didn't break down that night. He didn't scream or make a scene. He opened his phone, scrolled to a contact he had rarely used, and sent a short message. "Grace, I need your help. Something's wrong with Nate, and I'm going to find out what." Grace Whitmore didn't ask questions. The moment she read Julian's message, she drove straight to his apartment. She didn't knock. She used the spare key Nate had given her years ago, the one hidden in a dusty flower pot outside the porch. Julian was waiting in the living room, documents already spread across the table. They worked in silence, not because they didn't know what to say, but because the weight of what had happened required a new kind of language, one made of timelines, receipts, and digital trails. Grace was Nate's younger sister, fiercely intelligent, painfully observant, and the only person in the Whitmore family who had ever fully accepted Julian without condition. She had always been close to her brother, closer still after their father passed, and she knew instinctively that Nate's face in the garden that night hadn't been one of guilt. It had been confusion, clouded, like someone trapped in a fog he didn't create. The first breakthrough came late that night. Grace accessed Nate's shared iCloud drive. Julian pulled up Beau public posts from the last few weeks. They cross-referenced dates, names, timestamps. What they found wasn't just suspicious, it was surgical. There was an email thread between Nate Whitmore and Beau, but the email didn't match Nate's real address. It was a duplicate off by one letter. At a glance, no one would have noticed. But the writing, the way it mimicked Nate's phrases from college, it felt staged. The IP address linked to Vermont. Julian's hands tightened on the edge of the table. Estelle, she had created the account. She had been the one messaging Beau, pretending to be Nate. Over weeks, maybe months, she had arranged the details. The rented tent, the music, the menu, all scheduled and prepaid under Nate's name, using his own credit card, a card she still had access to. From the time she helped him set up his freelance LLC, Julian didn't speak. He simply pushed the next file toward Grace. It was a prescription, chamomilla. That's what Estelle had told them it was chamomile, for stress. She brewed it for Nate almost every evening during the last month. But when Grace contacted a friend who worked in pharmaceutical testing, the results came back different. The tea was laced with a mild sedative, a compound known to dull cognition and slow reaction time, enough to make someone emotionally detached, foggy, suggestible. Julian sat back in his chair, breathing shallow. She didn't just manipulate him, she drugged him. Grace nodded slowly. Her eyes didn't blink. And the wedding, it wasn't his idea. Not even close. The following afternoon, Julian returned to the house. Nate answered the door in a while. He looked thinner, quieter. But when Julian held up the folder evidence neatly ordered inside, Nate's face collapsed. They sat on the porch for a long time. Neither spoke, until Julian gently opened the folder and laid the pages out one by one. The email printouts, the credit card statements, the lab result on the tea blend, a printed copy of Estelle's reservation with the catering company, her name, her number, her handwriting. Nate didn't deny any of it. He just stared. Then, with a trembling voice, he whispered, "I thought I dreamed it. The tuxedo, the tent, the guests. Everything felt like a rehearsal for someone else's life. Like I was floating just outside of it." Julian didn't interrupt. Nate wiped his face, then met his eyes. "Did Beau know?" "He's gone. Grace told him the truth last night. He flew back to Oregon this morning. He said he never wanted to be a pawn in someone's fantasy." A long pause followed. Julian leaned forward. His voice was even. "So now I need to ask, after all of this, after everything, who do you choose?" Nate didn't hesitate. He reached out and took Julian's hand. "I choose you," he said. "Not because I owe you, not because we've built a life, but because after all of this, I finally see it clearly. I was asleep, and now I'm awake. I choose you, again. And this time, I mean it more than ever." It wasn't revenge they wanted. It was restoration. Julian and Grace spent the next 3 days gathering and organizing every document, photo, and timestamp into a presentation that couldn't be ignored. This wasn't just about clearing Julian's name or proving Nate's innocence. It was about truth, laid bare for everyone who had looked away too long. They chose the Whitmore family estate for the meeting, specifically the home of William Whitmore, Nate's father's older brother. William was a retired federal judge, a man with quiet authority, respected and feared in equal measure. If there was ever a voice Estelle might still listen to, it was his. The family gathered on a Saturday afternoon, polished shoes on hardwood floors, murmurs behind crystal glasses. Some came with curiosity, others with skepticism. Most believed Estelle's version of events, that Julian had drifted too far, that Nate had simply moved on with someone who understood what family meant. But then Julian stood up, and Grace stood beside him. With calm resolve, they began the presentation. Each piece of evidence was displayed on the large screen in the study, the forged email address and headers, mapped to an IP in Vermont, screenshots of the messages sent to Beau, written in phrases that Estelle often used. Not Nate. The catering contracts. Scheduled using Nate's credit card. Estelle's signature clear as day on the deposit form. Then came the surveillance footage. Grace had retrieved it from a neighbor's smart doorbell camera. It showed Estelle, dressed in heels and a navy coat, directing vendors and deliveries 3 days before the so-called wedding. Nate was nowhere to be seen. The final slide was a scan of the lab results. The tea Estelle had brewed nightly was confirmed to contain a sedative compound legally distributed, but not meant for continuous, unsupervised use. There was silence in the room, then a sharp intake of breath, and finally a voice. It was William. He looked directly at Estelle, who sat near the fireplace, eyes cold and mouth drawn tight. "You created a fictional crisis," William said slowly, "and then drugged your own son to make it real." Estelle didn't flinch, but her voice trembled ever so slightly. "He needed to wake up. He was losing his path. I did what I had to." Grace stepped forward, her voice louder than anyone had ever heard it. "You didn't do this for Nate. You did it because you couldn't control him anymore." Estelle's eyes flashed. "He deserves someone who will be there, not a husband chasing conferences and clients. He deserves a family, not a business partner with a wedding ring." But the room had turned against her. Uncles, aunts, cousins, even the more conservative relatives looked away from her now. The lies had gone too far, the manipulation too deep. William stood. "Estelle Whitmore," he declared, "from this day forward, you will no longer speak on behalf of this family. You are dismissed from every trust, from every event, from every table that bears our name." Estelle said nothing. She rose quietly, her pearl necklace catching the last ray of afternoon light, and walked out of the study. No one followed. In the days that followed, Nate formally withdrew the divorce petition. He and Julian packed their belongings and moved to a coastal town in Maine, somewhere with wind in the trees and silence between the waves. A place where healing could begin. Slowly, one morning at a time, they began therapy together. Not to repair what was broken, but to understand how to build something stronger. They blocked Estelle's number, changed locks, chose peace. And in that quietness, something new grew. 6 months passed, not quietly, but intentionally. Julian and Nate didn't rush healing. They let silence stretch when it needed to. They didn't pretend things had gone back to how they were. They honored the rupture by treating the repair with care. Their new home in coastal Maine sat just beyond a row of pine trees, where the scent of salt water mixed with forest. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs chosen, not inherited. Each room held light, each window open to sky. It was Grace who first mentioned the idea. Not another wedding, but a recommitment, not to erase the past, but to name the present. At first, Julian hesitated. Public declarations had always felt performative, like something built more for the audience than for the people speaking. But as Nate explained, with quiet conviction, we never got to say our vows out loud without fear or pressure or someone else scripting the day for us. So they planned it simply. A beach, a few chairs, no expectations. They invited only those who had stood with them when everything collapsed. Grace, William, friends from Chicago who had sent quiet messages of support when the internet had exploded with gossip. Nate's old art professor, Julian's mentor from the agency. No Estelle, no apology required. Just a circle of truth. The day arrived with wind and gold light. Grace officiated, barefoot in the sand, holding a notebook filled with scribbles and tears. She kept her words short because she said the best part was always the vows. Julian stepped forward first. He looked at Nate, no tuxedos, no champagne flutes, just open sky and waves breaking behind them. "I don't need perfect," he began. "I don't need easy or scripted. What I need is someone who's brave enough to walk beside me when things fall apart. You are that person, and I choose you. Not just today, but every ordinary, unremarkable, Quiet day after this. There was no applause, just breath, just the sound of the ocean. Then Nate took his turn. His voice wavered, but his eyes didn't. This time, I'm not making promises I might forget. I'm not standing here out of guilt or fear or family pressure. I'm here because I finally know who I am, and I finally know who you are. And I want that. All of it. Every morning, every silence, every messy, beautiful moment. I choose you, and I'll keep showing up. Grace closed her book. She wiped her eyes. Then, without a single "you may now," she stepped back, letting the moment speak for itself. Later, after the sun dipped low, she handed them a small envelope. Inside was a letter from the local LGBTQ+ youth shelter. Julian and Nate had been nominated to become temporary guardians for a 6-year-old boy named Miles. His parents had been lost to addiction. He needed a safe home while the court searched for a long-term solution. No timeline, no pressure, just the possibility of becoming someone's safe place. Julian looked at Nate. Nate looked at the ocean. Then they both nodded. Weeks later, a photo was taken. 3 figures stood on a quiet stretch of beach. Julian, holding Miles's small hand. Nate, laughing as the boy jumped through the tide. Behind them, drawn into the sand by Grace, were the words on the shelter's welcome card. Some families are born, some are chosen. Ours is both. And maybe that was all that needed to be said. What about you? Have you ever had to reclaim something that was almost taken from you and choose it again? With new eyes, share your story in the comments. For more stories about love that endures through silence, struggle, and truth, subscribe to Heart Story. Your next chapter might just begin here.